The Harriers hovering 30 feet above the deck. Soviet sailors are running, not to battle stations, away from them, grabbing life jackets, some moving toward the rails, men leaving their stations on a fully armed warship because a single British jet is hanging in the air above them, doing something they've never seen before. One aircraft, no weapons fired, complete psychological collapse. How did we get here? 12 hours earlier. Cold War, Norwegian Sea, 1982. HMS Invincible cuts through gray water. Britain's newest carrier. No catapults, no arrestor wires, just a ski jump ramp and sea harriers that take off like jets and land vertically like helicopters. The Soviets had been watching it. A Kara-class cruiser, the Kerch, operating nearby, shadowing NATO exercises, standard Cold War procedure. They watch us, we watch them. Nobody shoots. Lieutenant Commander Doug McLeod sits in his Sea Harrier on Invincible's deck. Standard patrol mission. Check on the Soviet cruiser. Visual identification. Maybe take some photos. Return to carrier. Routine. Except McLeod has an idea. The Harrier has 4 vectoring nozzles. The thrust can point down. The aircraft can hover. What everyone doesn't know is how you can use that capability to absolutely terrify people who've never seen it in person. The brief is simple. Fly over to the Soviet cruiser. Make sure they know we're here. Show the flag. McLeod has a different interpretation of show the flag. He launches from Invincible. Standard ski jump takeoff. The Harrier accelerates off the ramp, climbs, turns toward the Kerch's last known position. Takes about 15 minutes to cover the distance. The Soviet cruiser appears on the horizon. Kerch, modern ship. SAN-3 and SAN-4 surface-to-air missiles, gun systems, radar tracking multiple targets. A warship designed to defend Soviet task forces against NATO air attacks. McLeod approaches high, standard reconnaissance profile. The Soviets track him on radar. Nothing unusual. British aircraft flying past Soviet ships happens daily. They watch. He watches them watching. Then McLeod does something the Soviet crew has never experienced. He slows down. Not just reducing speed, actually slowing to a near stop. The nozzles rotate. The Harrier transitions from forward flight to hover. And he positions himself directly over the Kerch's deck, 30 feet above their heads. The Harrier just hangs there, engines screaming, jet blast hammering the deck, exhaust creating a maelstrom of heat and noise, and the aircraft isn't moving. It's just hovering, sitting in the air like it's parked, above a Soviet warship in international waters. Below decks, the Combat Information Center is trying to classify the contact. Radar says the aircraft is stationary. That makes no sense. Aircraft don't stop. The report is sent up the chain anyway. The response comes back wrong. Confirm speed. They already did. 0 relative movement. The radar operator checks again. Still 0. He reports it. The officer doesn't believe it. Checks the display himself. The contact isn't moving. It's just there, directly above them. Now nobody knows whether they are being attacked, observed, or mocked. The question goes to the captain. To fire, he would have to authorize it. To authorize it, he would need classification. To classify it as hostile, the aircraft would need to be attacking. It isn't. It's just there. The weapons officer is waiting for orders. The SAN-3 launcher can engage, but the geometry is wrong. The target is directly overhead. Firing means shooting straight up. If the missile misses, fragments come down on the ship. If it hits, debris comes down on the ship. Either way, they're shooting at something above their own deck. The guns have the same problem. Vertical engagement wasn't designed into the system. The tracking solution keeps defaulting to error. The fire control computer doesn't understand a target with 0 horizontal movement at low altitude. And there's another problem. What if the British claim it was a reconnaissance flight? What if firing first starts something nobody wants to finish? The captain doesn't order weapons free. So the crew watches, and as they watch, some of them break. The panic starts at the stern, sailors grabbing life jackets, moving toward the rails, officers shouting orders that nobody's following because the orders don't make sense when there's a British jump jet defying physics 30 feet above you. Later reports would describe sailors entering the water, not under orders, not as a drill. Some moving toward lifeboats, others to the rails. The kind of breakdown that happens when training doesn't cover what's actually happening. The jet blast is hitting the deck, equipment is getting blown around, the noise is deafening, and the aircraft is just sitting there, watching them. McLeod holds the hover for 45 seconds. The Harrier's stable, the nozzles adjusted perfectly, the aircraft sitting in the air like it's on an invisible platform. Then he transitions back to forward flight. Nozzles rotate. The Harrier accelerates, climbs, turns back toward Invincible. The entire demonstration took less than 2 minutes. The damage to the Soviet crew's confidence took considerably longer to repair. McLeod lands back on Invincible. Vertical landing. The Harrier descends onto the deck. Textbook execution. He shuts down, climbs out. The debrief is not a celebration, because if the Soviets had fired, there would be no explanation fast enough, no press release, no clarification, just a dead pilot and a war nobody planned to start. Fleet intelligence has been monitoring Soviet communications. The radio traffic from the Kerch was panicked, confused, reporting hostile aircraft attack, even though no weapons were fired. Describing crew disorder, requesting instructions for a situation they don't have procedures for. The intelligence officers are uneasy. The rules of engagement didn't explicitly cover hovering over a foreign warship. Technically legal doesn't mean tactically smart, and McLeod just proved you could create an international incident without firing a shot. The Royal Navy Command stays quiet. No official report, no press statement. What happened over the Kerch stays classified. Both sides have reasons to keep it that way. But the psychological impact is undeniable. Soviet naval intelligence immediately begins analyzing what happened. How did the British aircraft hover? How stable was it? Could it attack from hover? How do you defend against something that can stop in midair above you? The answers aren't comforting. After 1982, hovering contacts were no longer ignored. New engagement tables were written. New reporting language was introduced. Specific procedures for VTOL encounters were developed. How to track, when to engage, what to report. The doctrine gap was identified and closed. The problem wasn't that the Harrier could hover. The problem was that nobody had decided what that meant. And in that gap between capability and doctrine, panic flourished. NATO intelligence watches the Soviet response with interest. The vulnerability is now confirmed. Soviet doctrine hadn't accounted for vertical flight behavior. Their radar operators track by speed and altitude. Their missile systems engage based on predicted flight paths. Their defensive procedures assume aircraft behave predictably. A hovering aircraft breaks all those assumptions. But the real danger wasn't the Harrier. The real danger was the next encounter. Because doctrine gaps don't close instantly. Training takes months, equipment updates take years, and in that window, Soviet captains would face the same decision the Kerch captain did, except next time, someone might not hesitate. One missile launch based on uncertainty instead of threat, one British pilot dead, one explanation that arrives too late, and suddenly 2 nuclear powers are in a crisis neither planned for. That's the risk nobody wanted to discuss publicly, not the hover, the miscalculation. The Harrier just became significantly more valuable, not because of its weapons systems, because it revealed that Soviet naval forces had trained for threats that followed patterns, and nobody had asked what happens when the pattern breaks. The incident gets classified immediately, both sides. The Soviets don't want to admit what happened. The British don't want to reveal the full extent of the advantage they've discovered. But word spreads. Naval aviators hear the story. Soviet crews hear warnings about British VTOL capabilities. The Kerch incident becomes a quiet legend. The Sea Harrier was never designed for this. It was designed for air defense, intercept Soviet bombers attacking the fleet, protect the carrier group. But nobody designing it considered intimidation as a mission category. The Hawker Siddeley Harrier started development in the 1960s. Vertical takeoff and landing, no runway required. The Pegasus engine made it possible. 4 nozzles, thrust vectoring. The Royal Navy adopted it because British carriers were too small for conventional aircraft. The ski jump ramp compensated for the lack of catapults. The vertical landing eliminated the need for arrestor wires. The hover capability was treated as an engineering solution to a logistics problem. Takeoff without catapults, landing without arrestor wires. The doctrine writers never asked what else hovering could do. Not because they weren't smart, because the question didn't fit any existing mission category. Air defense meant interception, strike meant bomb delivery, reconnaissance meant observation. Hovering over an enemy warship to create psychological pressure? That wasn't in any manual. MacLeod proved the manual was incomplete. The Americans took notes. The AV-8B Harrier II was already in development for the U.S. Marine Corps. The concept was the same: vertical takeoff and landing, operational flexibility, no runway requirements. The psychological warfare capability was an unexpected bonus. By 1984, Soviet naval training had been updated, new procedures for VTOL threats, instructions on how to respond to hovering aircraft, better coordination between sensors and weapons. The vulnerability was being addressed, but the damage was done. Soviet naval crews had been shown that their training had gaps. Their officers had been shown that their procedures were incomplete. And all because one pilot decided to hover over a Soviet cruiser and watch what happened. The Sea Harrier served the Royal Navy until 2006. Falklands War, Balkan conflicts, routine patrol missions. It proved itself in combat. It proved itself as a defender of the fleet. But the Kerch incident remains its most interesting achievement. Not a combat mission, not a defensive success, just a demonstration that sometimes showing what you can do is more effective than actually doing it. The hover capability is still tactically relevant. The F-35B has it. Modern doctrine incorporates it. But the surprise is gone. Everyone now knows it's possible. In 1982, it was brand new. The Soviets had never seen it in person. Their intelligence had photos and descriptions, but experiencing it was different. That's what made the Kerch crew abandon their stations, not the actual threat, the impossibility of what they were seeing within their understanding of how aircraft behave. The Harrier was not invincible. It could not hover indefinitely. Fuel consumption in hover is massive, a few minutes maximum before you need to land. It could not evade a prepared engagement. If Soviet air defense had been expecting a hover demonstration, they could have planned around it. What made it dangerous was not power, it was timing and surprise. And the fact that when surprise hits the system unprepared for it, people make bad decisions. In that moment above the Kerch, nobody knew what the right response was. And in military operations, uncertainty is often more dangerous than firepower. That's what the Harrier exposed. Not a weakness in Soviet missiles or radar, a weakness in doctrine. The gap between what their systems could do and what their crews were trained to recognize. The gap closed eventually, but gaps like that still exist. The next time doctrine lags behind capability, the outcome won't be 45 seconds of confusion. It will be a missile launch, and by the time anyone figures out it was unnecessary, it will be too late. If stories about tactics that worked through surprise and doctrine gaps interest you, this channel covers them. No drama added, no myths created, just what actually happened and why it still matters. New story every few days. Thanks for watching.